Hello, leaders. Welcome back. It's Arlene Smith, and this is Healing the Hearts of Healthcare, the Leadership Edition. And I'm so glad that you are here. Number one, because it shows you are committed as a healthcare professional and a leader in learning simple strategies to help to lead your teams. And I'm going to remind you, when it comes to leadership, it is all about practice. And practice really does get you pretty darn close to perfect, and it's within your reach. So I wanted to share with you today 2 resources in my leadership career that really helped me. I always consider these 2 of my trusted resources that I've used probably for the last 10 or more years in helping me be that best leader to connect and form relationships with teams so that I could get them to high performing. And I'm going to remind you why we're doing this important work today. Number one, it's because we have a serious problem when it comes to healthcare. We have unhappy healthcare workers who are burned out, who are feeling exhausted. Some of them are lacking compassion. Some of them lack apathy. And they're really feeling as if they're second guessing, should I stay in the game? And I want to believe that those feelings come from a place of this idea that in healthcare, as leaders, we need to constantly be reminding our staff and our team members that healthcare is unpredictable. It is going to change and have a flux every single day. And we have to help prepare people to how they work best in an environment like that. Because it's never going to be the same way over and over again. It's just not possible. And as a leader, you play such an important role in helping to shape the way they see their world. And that is completely within your power. So I want you to learn how to turn the tide. And again, turning the tide when it comes to team performance, because I'm a big proponent of teaching how do you build strong teams that come together in difficult times and learn how to work together to support one another. And for me, that's complete skill development. But I want to say 2 resources really stand out for me. The first one is this book that I absolutely love. I've talked about it. I've taught about it for many, many years. Those people that know me know that I've been looking at this book for a very long time, and it's called Instant Turnaround. And it's by Harry Paul and Ross Reck, and I really, really love this book. I remember, like it was yesterday, reading through this book as a new leader of people. And again, I was really fortunate. I had great mentors that challenged me to think about people from a different perspective. It really helped to shape me in my leadership journey to really understand that part of our role in leadership is to really create that opportunity for connection. So I love this because this entire book, Instant Turnaround, has this really remarkable sort of story within it, and I'm not going to spoil it by telling you the story. You're going to have to read the book to kind of really understand it and grasp it. But I am going to highlight some key points that I think for you as a leader, you really have to zero in on. So number one, and pretty much throughout the thread of this entire book, is this sort of call to action for leaders to really pay attention to their people. And this really does have a domino effect as it relates to productivity. So I'm going to explain why. Because in the book, there's this really beautiful sort of aha moment. And I remember this again, like it was yesterday, of having that aha moment of realizing that when it comes to your teams and their performance, discretionary effort is something you need to educate yourself about and really know and understand it. So what is discretionary effort? You're probably sitting here thinking, what is it? And I'm going to actually read it to you on page 4 of the book because it's pretty remarkable. And again, in this story, I love this sort of idea. So this idea of discretionary effort is really this point that how do we look at people and get them back on track, right? And again, this was in the book. There's this beautiful story of how a leader came and asked the question and actually asked a consultant, what should I do? I'm in a panic. I'm in a state where, I'm looking at productivity in this plant that I'm working in, and I'm at just a significant danger of not meeting any of my targets. And I've tried everything when it comes to my employees to get them to hit these targets, and it's not possible. What can I do to help? And his response is, I told him to go through his plant several times a day and act like he cared about his employees, and then call me in 2 weeks and let me know how that goes. And I think that's pretty remarkable, because when you think about it, right, it seems very simple, right? Circulating around. Again, this is a story that we all know. It's not something I'm teaching you that's something that's like out of the blue here, but how this relates to you as a leader, understanding how you can, just by doing that, can tap into your team members' discretionary effort. Well, what is that? On page 38 of the book, it's so beautifully narrated in this way. And it says, discretionary effort is, and I quote, people regulate the amount of effort they put into their jobs based on how they feel they're being treated by their boss. If they feel like they are being treated well, then they will become excited about giving their absolute best efforts, which means they'll work way beyond their job descriptions. And if they feel like their efforts are unappreciated, they'll pull back and they will only do what they have to do to keep their jobs. And I would remind you, again, I think it's so important to just kind of keep this in your sort of front of your mind as a leader. When people get to that state where they're just doing the bare minimum, it's not just about that. It's that they're going to lead down a road where you will see apathy set in, where people just will no longer care. They're not going to give it that extra effort. And again, you're going to be scratching your head trying to figure out, what could I do differently? And I love in the book how they sort of give this sort of high level picture of, in the years, I think it was 1924 to 1932, that West Electric plant executives were sort of scratching their heads trying to figure out how could they improve productivity in their plants. And they studied and experimented with several different things. But one thing that really stood out was that paying attention to people working. That alone in of itself increased their productivity. And I'm sitting here thinking to myself, and that was 100 years ago. And it's no different than it is today. People want to make sure that their leaders are really paying attention to them and that are forming connections with them. It's no different than it was 100 years ago. But I'm going to remind you, as a leader, there are good ways that we can do this, and there are what I call not so effective ways of doing this. So let's talk about some of those ineffective ways that sometimes leaders fall into the trap, and they really think that this is okay in managing people. And as I kind of review these from the book, I want you to think about yourself again. What is your purpose in healthcare as a leader? Your goal is to drive your teams to this place where it doesn't matter what the circumstance is, it doesn't matter what's going on, that inside they know that they're wired to care and their job is to provide compassionate care. And so for them to do that, it means that their leaders need to lead from that place of caring and compassion. So for those of you that are sitting there thinking it's not possible, I can't see myself doing it, I'm going to remind you, everything is done through practice, and it is 100% possible. So in the book on page 15, there's like a really good sort of frame of reference here that just sort of reminds people of like some of the types of ineffective ways that leaders fall into these traps. And I love how in the book they call this management by the numbers. And I think what this is really telling is just they sort of paint this sort of picture of what this really looks like in practice. First, we make it very clear to the manager's employees what performance numbers they're expected to achieve, right? So we're setting expectations and we're letting everybody know this is what the bar needs to look like. But second, we strike the fear of God into people by informing them of the consequences if they don't hit that target. You can already think that this is probably not going to go as well as it could be. Third, we go into our offices and we continually monitor their actual performance numbers on our computers. You can kind of see where this is going, right? And fourth, if they don't, we get out of there and we kick some butt. And again, why is this not effective when it comes to leading and managing teams and helping them achieve their highest performance? And for you, helping them to heal their heart so that no matter what they experience every day, they're coming back, they're rejuvenated, and they're ready to go. That comes from leaders who are helping to shape that and helping to influence that environment. And I believe it really comes from an inability for us as human beings, especially as leaders, to form strong connections with people because we're so focused on those metrics and those measurements only. And so think about that. I mean, it really sends a message to people, whether you intend it or not, that the numbers are more important than the people. Right? That they're expendable, that there's, that there's this sort of lack of compassion. It doesn't really matter. This is what is important. And again, I'm going to remind you, in the field of healthcare, this is so critically important because you need compassionate caregivers. It just comes with the territory. So let's talk about in the book how they sort of outline a better strategy, or what I like to call the good way of doing that, right? It's really getting to a place where you understand that people that are coming to work, they are motivated by their own needs. And that's really hard for some people to kind of make this connection. Because when you think about people, right, what are their needs? Well, I mean, people really care about, they want to know that somebody cares about them and appreciates them. And for those of you that are like, I don't believe it, I'm going to remind you, all you have to do is look at the Gallup Q12 questions, which, has been researched by millions of people on employee engagement, right? And one of those questions is, I feel that someone cares about me, right? 100%. And in the field of healthcare, I would challenge every leader to think that is absolutely something that your team members are going to be looking for when it comes to leadership. Whether you're a supervisor or a VP or you're a CEO, it doesn't matter. They want to know that they're cared for. So what does that really look like? Well, think about all the subtle ways of what that doesn't look like, right? We're rushing maybe to a meeting. We're not noticing that someone's struggling. We're not noticing that someone needs help or assistance. And instead, we just breeze on by. We don't make eye contact. We don't even say hello. We don't even give a person a smile or connect with them and introduce ourselves if we don't know them, or even address them by name. There's a million different ways that this happens very naturally and organically. So you always have to be thinking as a leader, like, how am I going to be doing this, and kind of zero into that. And I really love in the book how they talk about they give this analogy of how tapping into discretionary effort is a little bit like, this idea of how difficult it can be in herding cats. And if you've never herded cats, in the story, they kind of give this funny sort of little example of someone trying to get a whole bunch of cats into one room and how very quickly they all are motivated by different needs. But in the story in itself, it also shows that, all it takes is sort of bringing that can of treats and shaking that can of treats. And all of a sudden, all the cats quickly arise, right? Because they know that they're motivated to do something. You're immediately tapping into that discretionary effort of that person, that cat, knowing that they want that treat. So it's so incredibly important as leaders to really think about like the how you're doing this. And I can't stress this enough, because sometimes, the reality is we're very, very busy. And I want to come from a place where I believe for most of us, when it comes to leadership, our hearts are really in the right place. We are completely motivated. It's not like people are waking up and saying, I cannot wait to do a really subpar job today. No, we're really motivated. And the reason we got to this level is that this is something that we're passionate about. We want to actually learn while we're here in life school to be that best version of us. Like, that's really where that motivation comes from. But in the busyness of the work that we do, in kind of all the emergencies that we're meant to face, and everything that sort of pops up at the last minute, this is our true reality. We literally get stuck in this place. And so I'm going to remind you, in the book, there's a really strong and heavy emphasis on, as leaders, we must motivate people through trust and not through fear. And that's really hard for some people to sort of make this connection. And I've seen people kind of struggle here, because it's very easy to direct someone to do something and tell them to do it. But it's completely different when you're talking about tapping into that discretionary effort. You are getting somebody to be influenced to want to give you more, because that strong degree of trust is there. And in the book, on page 52, they do such a really, really good job talking about the 4 B's of motivating your team. And I want to read these to you, because I think it's just so incredibly important to really just think about this. The 4 B's to motivating with trust. The first one is, as a leader, you've got to be real. That's first and foremost. That's number 1. You've got to be real. Number 2 is you've got to be appreciative. Number 3 is you've got to be interested. And number 4 is you've got to be nice. So let's kind of just go down a little bit here and talk about each one of these 4 B's, so that you can have a really good understanding of what that looks like in the day-to-day practice. And if we start with the first one, which is you just being real, this is you being your authentic self. It's the person you were designed to be here while you're here in life school. And I always remind leaders that sometimes when it comes to leadership, it's more important for you to prepare your people to lead from your authentic self, so they understand it and they see it. Right? They see that because you're preparing them. So let me give you this example. Like, let's just say that I have a tendency to want to have control of certain things. And maybe it's like part of my nature. I'm a little bit OCD. I like things a certain way. There is nothing wrong with preparing your team by letting people know, hey, I'm just letting you know, this is part of who I am. I'm working on this. Like, it's so important to me. But don't be surprised if sometimes I'm circling behind you, or I'm looking to maybe check things off that things were done. It's not about you. This is all about me. It's just the way I like to sort of button everything up and make sure that it's all taken care of. See, that is a way to connect with people, because number 1, you're being authentic. Number 2, you're being genuine. You're not trying to tell people that you're somebody else, or you're not trying to actually show people that you're something else, because people are smart and they can spot phony a mile away. So don't try to deceive somebody by acting like somebody that you're not. Your team members will know it. And they will look at you in a different way. They certainly won't get behind you and give you all that discretionary effort. It's just not going to happen. So the other flip side to this is, as human beings, people really want a leader to be, honest and open and approachable, humble and respectful. I mean, there's lots of things that go into this equation. And so, for most of you, as you're going through this journey, you've got to be thinking, like, how am I showing this in really real time, right? And how are people seeing that I am a person that's trustworthy? because I can be trusted, because, I don't lose my cool. I'm open to when people have to come up and ask me a question, and I'm really creating a psychological safe space for people to just ask a question and me to make them feel like that's completely acceptable. And think about all the times where these subtle sort of things happen. And so it's incredibly important, right? And I'm going to remind you, number 2 is really that ability to be appreciative. I'm not telling you anything you don't know. People crave this from their leaders. I mean, it really is a make it or break it difference for them. Like if I had a really hard day or a really hard shift, and I had a leader that came up to me and just said, I just want to thank you for not only did you do it, but you did it in such a way where I just felt so incredibly proud as your leader. You could have sat there and complained about it, but you didn't. You just got to work. You made it happen. And boy, in the end of the day, it just makes me so proud to be able to be supporting somebody like you. Again, I'm going to remind you, if we just dial up that sort of appreciation and take it to that next level for people, it changes everything for people because, again, it has to be genuine, it has to be authentic, and you have to give them very specific examples. And I'm going to remind you, there are people out there in this world that get stuck here where they're like, do I really have to tell people and thank them for showing up? Yes, 100%, right? People are coming into work, they got lots going on in their lives, and they're expected to turn that sort of switch off and provide compassionate care. And so for some people, especially when they're still learning and they're junior and they're just trying to get their footing, they're not going to be perfect at this. So showing up and thanking people and saying, I'm just so thankful that you came today. What's that do? I'm going to again say to you, so what? So what happens if you say that to somebody? What do you run the risk of? You run the risk of that person feels appreciated. But if you do nothing with that and you ignore it, you run the risk that person is just going to say, why bother? Why do I even do it? And that is so incredibly important for healthcare because, again, it does make a difference when it comes to leadership. You have to be interested in the person. And let's talk about really specific examples of how this plays out when it comes to leadership. Number 1, I always say it's about asking for people's opinions. Again, that proverb that people that are closest to the problems usually have the solution. So as a leader, you might exactly know what the problem is. You might exactly know the solution is. But why do you ask these questions? It's really to empower your workforce, to get them to start thinking critically and to really be respectful of the person that's in it really may have something to contribute. And so as a leader, we need to create that safe space for people to get there, right? We have to give genuine thanks for people to share their opinions. And then number 3, it's not going to help if you're just that leader and you're asking for solutions, but you do nothing about it. I mean, a big part of leadership is taking that action and taking it forward. So if you can't work on something right away, that's totally fine, right? You write that down and you schedule it when you can look at it and you let that person know, hey, listen, this week, busy week. I've got a lot of things that are going on, but I don't want you to lose sight of the fact that I am going to go and drill down on this and look at this in a deeper way when I've got a little bit more time to be able to do that. Again, those are the experiences that your team members are going to be looking to you and saying, is this leader doing this? And it is absolutely possible through practice, but you've got to know that, number 1, you're doing it. So absolutely get into this pattern where you're really thinking about, am I interested? Am I showing that I'm interested? Or again, am I just rushing by people and diverting my eyes from their line of sight because I don't want to make contact because I don't know how to say to somebody that I don't really know them. And if you're that type of leader where you manage a large organization, a large workforce, and it's highly probable that you're not going to know a person, or you just haven't been introduced to that person just yet, listen, there's nothing wrong with being vulnerable and just letting somebody know, hey, I'm Arlene Smith. This is my role here. And I see that you're a new face. And I didn't want to walk past you without getting to know who you are and what you do here. And I'm so glad that you joined. See, that is a person that shows through their actions that they actually are interested in that individual. And it makes a difference when it comes to the people that you serve and that turn around and then serve others. And then the last one is really just being nice. And I've seen people really mess this up in so many different ways throughout my leadership career, even as a consultant, right? And so being nice, like if we really just look at what we're talking about here, I always say it's an opportunity for you as leaders to really bring something that brightens somebody's day, right? And so think about that, like the examples, the words, like even just being encouraging or being inspirational or just letting somebody know, like, I loved when you were walking towards me and I saw you immediately smiled. That shows me that the way you respond to our patients and their family members is probably the same way. Like, it makes me so proud as your leader to see you doing that. And so think about those opportunities. Again, smiling is one thing. Like, you can do that. You can kind of create the shift in the mood, right? And so you won't be doing this if it's not even on your radar and you have this tendency to be nasty, right? Or dismissive, or you're just feeling as if, I don't even know why I bother, or I don't even need to bother because I've got so much I've got to do on my plate and I'm so busy, right? People know when the way they're meant to feel. And if you're coming across as somebody that's acting like you're so superior, how in the world are you going to connect with people? It just does not happen. So don't forget that this is really part of your journey here in life school as a leader. You're learning all of these important lessons, and it's something that you want to do. And in the book, one of the things that I still think about this pretty much, for so many years, I read this book. It had to be back in like 2007, 2008, somewhere around there, 2009. But I remember just this concept of this idea of how as leaders you can make work this place where it's a destination where there is fun, where people like enjoy and want to come to work, where that is something that they can channel and feel. And this is really hard sometimes for leaders because, again, you think of healthcare, it can't just be us all having a grand old time. But again, a leader has the ability to create the space where teams come together and they form and they do that and it's done properly. It's not just like we hold it up by chance, because chances are if that's what you're hoping for, then it's not happening naturally and organically. People have to help being brought together. They're coming from all different backgrounds, all different cultures, all different age groups. And part of your role as a leader is to really bring people together and to really make sure that it's a safe space and people understand and know this is why we do this here, because we take care of people. Right? And if we don't take care of one another and we don't find ways to communicate with one another in a way that builds people up and makes people feel good about themselves, then how will they turn around and provide that care to other people? It's just not going to happen. And it never does. So don't forget that that's an important piece of this. And in the book, they do a really good job of reminding you as an individual contributor, you can, or maybe as a leader, maybe if you only have a single department, you can absolutely do this. But the real power of change and influence comes when like the entire senior leadership team really looks at it from the same lens, right? Where they really have buy-in and they look at the importance of like communicating and being open and honest and inspiring people and encouraging people. And as they're circulating, they're doing the same thing, right? and that those senior leaders are visible and accessible. They're not just darting by people in a hallway. They're at least greeting them and saying hello, and they're supporting them, right? They're supporting this initiative of trying to bring people together and create this really strong sense of team, and they're praising and recognizing people. And so it's critically important when it comes to leadership because it makes a difference. And I'm going to tell you, one of the things that I love is, when I was a consultant, one of the things I loved was I was working with a center, and I will never forget they talked about this, creating this sort of visual way of remembering it. And they decided on the 15, the 10, and the 5 rule. And you've probably heard about this. So this is not anything that's new, right? So 15 feet, as the leaders were sort of, as soon as they saw someone coming towards them, they made sure to make eye contact with that person, not dart away, not be uncomfortable. And again, for introverts, this might be really a growth opportunity, right? To learn to make that eye contact, right, with that person so they can see that you're connecting with them, right? And at 10 feet, it really is sort of creating a smile, right? And making sure that person can feel you being at ease with them, right? And then when you get to that 5 feet away, you're saying hello to somebody. And if you know them, you're greeting them by name. But at least saying that hello and creating that space where people feel like they can actually be seen. And just think about this as an opportunity, because there are so many people that are walking around in our workplaces and they feel invisible, right? And so when every single leader in wherever they work is doing this, it really pulls people in. They can feel this stronger connection, and it has incredible power with this. And, I'm a big nerd, so I love the work that Deloitte does every year with their sort of, their global human capital trend report. And for those of you that may know, the 2024 report is available. And I always love to scour that report and to really look at it for those sort of trends when it comes to how is the workforce changing and evolving, and through research, what are we learning through those interviews? And Deloitte does such a beautiful job sort of conveying all that. So number one, if you don't have that report, you should absolutely download it, because it's a roadmap for you and you really want to make sure you're focusing on that. But I love how this year's report really focuses on this human factor and sort of this idea that, we've got to be thriving beyond our boundaries, as human beings. And on page, I think it's 13 of the report, there is this entire section on human sustainability. And I absolutely love this concept because, again, it just fits very naturally into this great work of instant turnaround and how to shift and take your teams to high performance. And it's really when an organization, and I love it because it's really the degree that an organization creates value for people as human beings. And it's the most simplest way of saying it, right? You're laser focused on their health and their well-being. So that is important. And that is so critically important when you think about healthcare, because we're living in a post-COVID world where we still have team members that are still trying to navigate to the sense of normalcy, and the normalcy hasn't occurred. And we still have a lot of people, similar to how I was, right, that were serving during that time, that were exposed to pain and suffering firsthand, that were exposed to a lot of trauma and never found ways to deal with that. And so they're still walking around with, as I call it, this great sadness, to where, that embodies their spirit and it weighs down their soul. So until we can get people to that point where we teach them, this is how we elevate ourselves and come out of the difficult times as leaders, it's a true opportunity to make those connections around people as human beings. And number two, I love in the report how they really focus on, as part of this human sustainability, it's this recognition that, people really need a leader that stands behind them, that helps them to develop the skills they need to be the most successful in their field, both personally and professionally. And when you think about this in terms of our healthcare and our workforce, This is a huge opportunity, like a huge opportunity to take a person that's wired to care and figure out how, as a leader, can I grow and develop this talent? How can I take them to a whole different level? And, check out the whole entire report for some really good suggestions on how you can do this, because it's very interesting. I find it very fascinating. And again, it sort of falls in this place where I read so much research how we're shifting away from the old industrial age into like a new age where we're really looking at our workforce as people who really want to come to work and do a great job. But the old way of doing things, we have to evolve and we have to look at it differently. So that leads me to the second book that for me, this really was a game changer once I really understood all the principles and I started figuring out how do I actually create this and make this part of my everyday in team formation and building strong teams. And that is Stephen Covey's great work in The Speed of Trust. And I love this. I've done so much teaching on this and I really find the whole concept fascinating. For those of you that are not familiar with this work, I'm going to remind you what you do has a greater impact on what you say. And Stephen says that in the book. And I love how he sort of talks about sort of trust from this place of, this trust ATM that I want you to think about, which is, think about all of the times as a leader, you're depositing into this ATM, into each employee, trustful actions where your words and your actions are fully aligned. So it builds that trust up and it builds it up. And then conversely, you really have to think about the number of withdrawals that you're taking out of that ATM, which means as a leader, you may not be so laser tuned into how you're making those withdrawals or what you specifically are doing. And so I love this work. I'm going to always encourage everybody to, if you have not read this or it's been a while, you absolutely want to read it. And Stephen does such a great job talking about sort of these 13 behaviors when it comes to leadership that are really important. And I want to talk about just a few of them. I'm not going to cover all the behaviors, but some of them I think really stand out when it comes to leadership in sort of the healthcare industry, and just making sure that as leaders we're creating a very safe place for people to feel like they can engage with us and that we are also trustworthy. So one of the behaviors is number 2, and that's our ability as leaders to demonstrate respect. And I always tell people this is like your words, your deeds, and your actions. Like it's all of it, right? You have to think at all times when you are navigating through the course of your day, how am I demonstrating respect to people? So there's a few ones that I always share when I think about leadership. Number 1 is a very simple one, right? So how do I show respect for people, right? If I am not doing my part as a leader and I am super busy and I have not planned out my tasks or my day or my work accordingly, and now as a result, I have to ask my team and demand things from them in the last minute because somebody's pressing down on me, and I, of course, didn't do my piece, right? How is that respectful of the person, right? Think about all the times we may be disrespectful in our word choice. And I always use the word choice because it really is that. We have to be really cognizant that words have meaning. And again, we manage multi-generational, multicultural. So we really have to be tuned into this and really just come from a place of love and make sure that when we're choosing our words, we're choosing them well. And if you chose your words poorly, like, don't be embarrassed to say, I'm so sorry. That is absolutely not what I meant. In the busyness, I can understand how that may have caused you to feel offended. That certainly was not my intent. I hope you can see that. And I hope that you understand that I'm going to do better next time to make sure I'm aware of this. Because, we're all imperfect. Nobody's running around there and doing it 180%, like 100% all the time. It just sometimes we're going to trip over our words and say things that maybe we didn't want to say. And it's okay to right those wrongs. And by the way, that's a behavior. So number 2, I love the other behavior, which is this idea of getting better. Like, you as a leader have to recognize that part of your journey here in life school is to be the best leader possible. I mean, you are influencing people every day. Either they're going home at night and saying, thank God I had that leader, right? Because we had such a terrible day and I could have never done what I did and come back again the next day without them being there. Or they're saying something completely different, like, can you believe that person stayed in their office all day when they knew we had that medical emergency, that family screaming at us, those 2 call outs, right? So we have to be sort of tuned to this idea that part of our journey is to constantly get better. And we're going to do this through practice. And I'm going to remind you, part of getting better is putting what you learn into practice. So, it means being around your people. It means engaging with them, that human side, those connections, forming those relationships. And for those of you that say, I'm not sure how to do that, again, I'm going to remind you, bring people together and really just create a very safe space for people to actually just share one thing that we all have in common, right? And that's how you do it, right? You build your relationships by finding commonalities in one another. Oh my goodness, you love this, I love this, right? It makes it very simple and very easy. So I love this idea of this behavior of getting better, because as a leader, if you don't want to get better, how in the world can you expect your healthcare workers to continue to stay abreast of all the evidence-based practices and changes and new standards of care if you're not willing to do that yourself? So it's so incredibly important as a leader. We have to do that. And I love the behavior that he talks about in the book, which is confronting reality. And we have to do this when it comes to leadership. Listen, you're not really going to understand the reality of what your staff are facing. That's why I love the show Undercover Boss, right? It's this idea of when you're working and you're directly sort of observing what's happening, you see things in a completely different perspective. You sometimes can identify and understand those barriers that are putting things that are getting in the way for your people. But confronting reality for them is really just you making sure that you can see that in somebody, right? And so it's really an opportunity for you to just flex and practice your skills. Sometimes it's around communication. Like, I can see that was a challenging conversation you had with that family. I can see how difficult that was. I can see how hard that is. I was just talking to a friend of mine in the field, and she's a dementia expert, and she and I were sort of talking about education, and she was sharing this beautiful story of this aide that was, in tears in a break room, and she happened upon that person. And instead of feeling awkward about it, of course, because she's a fabulous leader and she totally gets it, she embraced the person and said, like, hey, is everything okay? Is there something I can help you with? Is it something here, or is it something at home? And the person reassured her it has nothing to do with here. It's just home. And she just created a nice, safe space to say, you know what? Sometimes it happens, right? We have these things. Just take some time out. I'll go and check on your assignment. Just take a few extra minutes to just find your center and grounding, right? Again, a leader taking that time to take that step forward, that is incredibly powerful. And so you confronting reality is so critically important. And of course, the last 2 that I think are critical is clarifying expectations, which we know we need to do better with when it comes to healthcare. We need to be very specific around those expectations. We need to make sure they're consistently being sort of communicated across to everybody so that we create a safe space where favoritism does not sort of become the perception of your workforce, and making sure that everybody is held to that same standard. So that is where we practice accountability. And for most leaders, this is really where the greatest work is going to come. The conversations don't always come naturally, but let me just assure you, it comes with time. It's like anything in this world, you do it through practice and repetition. You have one conversation, you go back, you self-reflect. How could I have done that differently? What could I have done differently? Did I choose the right time? Could I have maybe said it differently? Could I have been a little bit more understanding of what might have been happening around? Did I jump to a conclusion before asking all the questions? So if you just find yourself in this state where you recognize the importance of self-reflection, you're going to get there. And I promise you, you will feel really confident because as you're learning, again, it's like going back, right? If something doesn't land properly, there is no harm in going back to that person, after a little bit of time has passed, maybe a few hours, maybe the next day, and just really saying to somebody like, listen, I was up all night thinking about that conversation you and I had. And I kept walking away. Look, when I walked away, it just kept nagging at me and nagging at me and nagging at me and making me realize that it didn't land in the way I wanted it to. My whole purpose was for us to have that conversation, for you to walk away and be inspired and be encouraged and to really know that I appreciate you and I wanted things to be differently. But I saw this small little thing that I wanted us to talk about that really I needed to see a change. And I feel like you walked away from that entire conversation and that is all you zeroed in on. And for that, I'm truly sorry. Right? People respond to that authenticity. And I can't stress that enough. As a leader, that is so key. And Stephen does really great work. I'm not going to go into it in this podcast, but I'm going to encourage you to go into it on the importance of self-trust because it speaks to your credibility as a leader. Like if you are not a trustworthy person, and again, he gives you 2 cores that speak to your character and 2 cores that speak to your competency as a leader. If you're not doing both, all 4 of those, you might be having these blind spots or gaps where it doesn't matter what you do, your people are not going to believe you because your words and your actions are not fully aligned. So why does all this matter? Why are we talking about the importance of turning the tide when it comes to team performance? Well, because the work that your team members do is incredibly challenging. And I've already shared with you, there's a human side to this, which is, in this goal of taking care of other people, in providing services to people, there's an exchange of energy that's happening all the time. And if you're not zeroed into the importance of this, you could find that people are being depleted and they're walking away from work feeling like, I just don't know if I can continue to do this. And part of what I really want you to understand is as a leader of healthcare workers, a big piece of this is your ability to inspire and motivate and to be appreciative and to thank and create enthusiasm and to really help reignite that little flicker into a larger flame. Because you want them to be present and you want them to come back and you want them to return. And that is not going to come from the individual. It's going to come from the leader who sees it in that person, who respects the fact that that person needs to be told that, and who appreciates how that single act is going to fuel them to the next day of coming back that next time. And so, again, it's so incredibly important because I'm going to remind you in the field of healthcare, what you want is you want compassionate caregivers. That is not going to come without work and effort from you as the leader. You must be compassionate. You must be caring. You must be interested. You must be all of it to the person that you're leading, because otherwise they're going to walk away and really start thinking, is this really what I signed up to do? And you may lose that person and they may leave the field of healthcare because they just didn't have somebody that gave them the hope and the inspiration and the belief that things could be better. It is such a tremendous opportunity as leaders, and I'm going to challenge you to think about this every single day that you go into work. How can I make somebody see their role differently? How can I make them believe that change and hope is possible and that they can continue to come back because I'm going to be here by their side and I'm going to make sure that they feel safe and protected. See, that is within your realm and it's 100% possible. Listen, I hope you enjoyed this podcast, but more importantly, I hope you took some lessons from this. And if you're not familiar with this great work, I'm going to remind you, take the time out to do some research. It can be a game changer when it comes to you and your leadership skills. And if you don't hear it enough, I just want to say it so you hear it more frequently. Thank you for everything you do in leading our biggest workforce in the world, the caregivers, the healers, those that are taking care of others. Not only are you doing it, but you're coming back with a spirit and a tenacity that you want to be the best version so that one day when your team members leave you, they talk fondly of you and they say, I'm so thankful that I had that person in my life. Listen, I hope you join me on a future podcast. Take care of yourself and goodbye, everyone.